which is a reflection on some of the circumstances in Lebanon and different parts of the world before we transition to the next session. So thank you.
Земля від жаху тихо помирала, згасала, як остання свічка на столі.
Assis sur la balançoire de la solitude, mécontent de son destin.
أنت وطني، لكني أراك جريحا ومكسورا يا موطني.
جبل أنا تحت العواصف صامد لأرى شمس السلام بقلبي تسطع.
Nos jeunes âmes réclament le calme sans blâme, sans armes, sans lame ni flamme.
Як природні громи співають, як страшно кричать гармати.
Стреляя в плоть, вы поразили небо. Верните солнцу его прошлый свет.
نأتي بذكرى زمان حين نذكره ينبري في لظى أشواقنا الشجن.
Levez la tête vers le ciel, espérant qu'il y aura un meilleur lendemain.
أين ذهب الأمل؟ وكيف غاب الأمان منك يا موطني؟
هر خوا جنازې دي چې یو بل پسې جګېږي، هیلې ارمانونه ټول په زړو کې خاورې کېږي.
لارې ته ګورم او قدم اخلم، زه د ټوپک پر ځای قلم اخلم.
Can you smell the earth when the rain pours? The smell of hope, the smell of a new day.
Нам снится мир, тепло руки и запах хлеба, и трели птиц, встречающих рассвет.
The sparrows are dancing in beautiful pairs.
Looking for a place to build its nest, where love has made her blessings rest. All that pain, we've had enough.
Our country needs life and peace.
It is something that we pray for when we think we have nothing left.
A child running under the sun, with a smile so bright that it lights a dull night.
I can imagine such a day for hours and hours.
كل فرد منا يحلم أن يعيش باطمئنان وسلام واستقرار.
Peace is not seeing black or men, women and children.
هو السلام ممزوج بكلماتنا، ببسماتنا، بأناملنا التي كافحت الآلام. سلام، سلام.
Peace.
Peace.
Peace is never too late. Peace is living in a world without hate.
Thank you, Fiona. Back to you.
All right. Thank you. Sorry, I'm quite moved by all of the things that have been discussed thus far. Before we move forward with the next session, I will be introducing the panelists, and I would like to mention that to look at the website of IAGIMP Canada for updates and further information about all the panelists if you're interested in anything that anyone has shared. So moving forward, excuse me, the next session relates to this idea of embodiment. So I've, found some thoughts about embodiment just to share with folks as we get started and transition to this next session, which will be partly experiential. So embodiment, what is embodiment? Is it feeling at home in your body? perhaps an ability to know and feel the body's sensations. Some of the panelists discussed the ability to feel sensations from the stage to one's body, or from an experience on the street, dance on the street, or a movement on the street to one's body, or popular theater. So knowing how to respond with wisdom is also related to embodiment, knowing the safe and healthy expression of your needs, desires, fears, anger, joys, hopes, and wants. So just wanted to put that into, one's thoughts as we go forward. The next session is called Embodied Leadership, the Hungers and Needs of Conflict. And this session introduces the map to reveal how embodied patterns of unmet needs trigger conflict. Our wounds keep us in a loop of wounding others. And these two presenters, who are extremely skilled movers, who are both certified movement analysts, will guide movement and imagination to bring new awareness of our needs and hungers as a pathway to peace building. One of the presenters is Deborah Heifetz, who each time I speak with her is in a different part of the world, but I believe she may be in Italy right now. And she has created an incredible system, which you'll learn part of right after this. And she also worked as a special advisor to the crisis management team of the Israeli police during the Oslo years. She has numerous accomplishments that you can read on this, bio, but she's also a wonderful and very present human being who has so much to offer to the world. And I'm excited to hear from her, as well as the co-panelist, Judy Gantz, who is also a CMA that I mentioned, certified movement analyst, and a master's of dance. She is also the director and founder of the Center for Movement Education and Research. And, a very well-respected and well-known teacher, movement specialist with a long-time career. She and Deborah are working together to develop a system which you can learn about now. So I'm going to quickly pass the slides now back, but I first want to quickly introduce, which you've already met, Nadra. She will be one of the co-moderators in this session. And Annie Look, who is another co-moderator, will be looking for questions and from the question and answer or the chat box. If you would please leave them there, that would be very helpful. Thank you. And stop share and hello. So we'll start this with Judy, who will be speaking first, I believe. Correct? Am I correct? Or did I do it wrong? I'm sorry.
Deborah's going to begin speaking, but I just wanted to say
Deborah's speaking. Okay.
She's speaking first, but I wanted to just say that as a dancer and in the magnificence of creating art, there still is a huge lag between what the average person kinesthetically even perceives from great dance. So taking the large aspect of what dance art is giving to culture and society, Deborah and I are really distilling down, and imagine us speaking to people who have very low kinesthetic intelligence. Imagine us coming in with our movement as a Lobman movement analyst and as dancers, bringing that knowledge into a population. who is much less embodied than the panelists that are here with us today. So I just wanted to frame that a bit and turn this to Deborah, who will begin our session. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
So, hi, Shauna. And so I guess I will begin. Thank you. Looking forward to sharing my work. Now, what I'll do is I'm going to go to my PowerPoint. It's going to be a little bit more thinking, but also I'll be inviting feeling and sensing as well. So allow me to share with you my work. And I will begin by sharing my screen with you all. So this story is about embodied leadership, but it's really the journey of how to deal with these inner and interpersonal struggles that we all face that perpetuates the suffering in our lives. So this is me as a child. The middle picture, I'm dancing with my brother at my other brother's bar mitzvah, and that's me dancing. Okay, so why am I showing you a picture of me dancing? Because everything about me and my life is about relationship. So for me, the dance was I was never particularly interested in performance of dance as much as the magic circle of dance as a relationship, both between people, between the self, and creating community. So the relationship and the belonging aspect is what brought me to Israel. So I went to Israel and I moved there with my Israeli husband and my kids in 1992. And by 1993 or 95, I was already in a PhD program in social anthropology. And by that, at the same time, I took a course, a training with Marshall Rosenberg, who is the founder of Nonviolent Communication. So that stunned me with the understanding that there is this relationship between needs and emotions. So with that, I embarked on this incredible journey to understand the Oslo experiment, the Oslo peace agreement between the Palestinian people and the Israeli people trying to create a negotiation relationship, a peace agreement. And that consisted of, and I purposely, this picture is potent because the quality of the tear and the flags is a sensate experience of what it was like in the field. So here's a picture of the negotiation relationships. My PhD was on the joint patrols, these military jeeps who are going out and negotiating the relationship. Now, understand, I go into the field with this body of movement knowledge and also a burgeoning interested in trauma. And so I come out and I'm curious, how is this working? How are they negotiating the relationships? And what I notice is that they are continuously negotiating the relationship between emotions, needs, and triggers. So this ongoing tension and struggle. And for example, in one picture, you're seeing them negotiating, how do you hold a gun? How do you build trust? Everything in this experiment of what I call non-mediated peacekeeping was a negotiation of these very deep-seated layers of nonverbal and verbal meaning. So here's a picture of the joint room. Now, this is a room that was used by Israelis and Palestinians as their organizing room, where they would discuss how to share security cooperation. Okay, so if I don't know if anybody would notice you may particularly notice in this room. You see a soldier. You notice a soldier. You notice chairs. Maybe you think it's a school, but it's not. It's a military base that has this joint operating room. What happened in this room is that you see that there's one picture that frame. I mean, there's one sort of board that's green and the other boards are red, are blue. Now, the Palestinian side was unwilling to sit with the Israeli side until the Israelis put up the large green board. Now, this may seem trivial, but it was enough for them not to feel trust, because what you're negotiating here is the negotiation of identity. And identity is immersed in language, in symbols, in colors, in songs, in gestures, as well as in the land that you live in. And so much of what was this whole, the conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict cannot be understood unless one understands that there is an underlying argument about who is the true native, who really belongs to the land. And that's arguable. Who really belongs to the land, and who has the privilege of controlling whom, all right? Or ideally, what I was hoping for, being a peace person and putting my life on the line because it was dangerous to be out there, was to see how can we support a peaceful living together situation. So that sequenced me into developing this. So what you see here is you see the confusion of all these emotions and all these needs in the field. How could I make sense? How could I understand what was perpetuating all this suffering? I mean, I had 3 little boys at home. And so this wasn't just an intellectual curiosity. I was deeply immersed in trying to create peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And so in my teaching, I found myself unable to make sense of. I saw these patterns, and what are the patterns to these needs? The basic idea of human needs, is that when needs are not fulfilled, people fight. Conflict is a function of unmet needs. So most of us know of Abraham Maslow. Over here is Rosenberg, who created nonviolent communication. And so what I tried to do is I tried to sort of put a graphic of how do I make sense of what these people are doing? I mean, there was peace between the soldiers were actually working together in an impossible political situation, but the military was actually working together, and the soldiers were PLO and Israeli soldiers, and they were coordinating their common vision to create a peaceful life together. Now, what do I do with this? I was watching this, and I watched the crossover, the miscommunication, and the stupidity that I saw in what was called security, when it was actually creating more insecurity. How do I make sense? So first of all, I decided that, okay, there are these human needs, and all these men are seeing this in a very linear way. But actually, it's more three-dimensional. It's a system of interconnected needs. So the first thing for me to do is look at, well, what are some common patterns? So I identified the following needs in this map that I developed. So one is esteem, people fighting for honor, people fighting for their dignity. Another one is safety, people wanting to feel that they can live, people wanting to feel that they can feel safe and secure and relaxed. Having an identity. Who am I? Where am I? I mean, where do I belong? Who are my people? What are my values? Recognition, to feel understood, to be considered. Belonging, that I'm connected to you, I'm connected to that other person, that I feel a sense of trust and attunement and interconnectivity. Autonomy. What we find often in conflict is the conflict between I want to express my will, and how does that go counter to you expressing yours? What is missing here for me, I found, was one, fairness. Now, when people talk about justice, often justice comes up with revenge. So revenge and justice, it just didn't lend itself to a deeply felt motivation. So I use the word fairness. I think fairness, it lends itself to relationship more than when people talk about interest. People talk about justice. Justice doesn't support, it becomes more instrumental, whereas fairness is inviting, how do we create relationship? Again, relationship. But the other thing that's lacking, and that was very important to me, was at the same time as I've been working on this model, I was trained in trauma healing by Peter Levine's work of somatic experiencing, which brought attention to the felt sense. What am I feeling, and how can that feelingness be a resource for me? So I also saw at the same time that when people look at war and conflict, there's the tragedy of the history of sex and violence and pleasure being all intertwined. And one can't understand conflict if one doesn't look at the body as a core motivating force behind what perpetuates conflict. That pleasure is a variable that contributes to the perpetuation of conflict. So I put physical aliveness on this map. After that, I said, okay, wait a second. So I've got this, but are there any other patterns in this? And I found out that there are 4 categories that we could organize this around. One category is love. So love is one category, what I call a hunger, a craving, a general craving. Another one is survival, the survival ones. Another one is meaning. How do I make sense of the world? What are my values in the world? And that leads me to what was lacking, and that is power. So there was no people in this whole system of needs theorists, from Max Neef, who does human scale development, to that whole that spectrum of people that are on there. I'm not going to spend the time explaining, but now after doing this, I said, okay, this kind of makes sense to me, but let me show you how it makes sense as a system. So I arranged it in the following way, and I'm going to continue with trying to explain this to you by just focusing first on the 4 basic categories that I describe as hungers, and why it's particularly relevant to understanding conflict and suffering. I describe these 4 hungers as cravings, general cravings and the emotions are the ways that our body are expressing that something is missing. And so as an embodied experience, I begin with the life force. And what we see, which is so intriguing, is that these 4 basic categories are consistent with the 4 basic categories of human development. So from the onset, even as we are conceived in utero, our fetus is sensing, is growing and shrinking. There's a constriction, even in utero, at the sensation that there is something that is the body can already perceive as danger. So already and at birth, the moral reflex is the first expression of fear. So fear is the primary core emotion that is underneath the survival of all of us, right? So the next one, at about that whole first year of life, is all nonverbal. And that whole year of life, one of the emotions that we see is the sadness, the crying baby. It's the yearning to be seen, the yearning to be understood, the yearning to be attuned to be perceived, to belong, to be held. At about the age of 2, 2.5, we enter the terrible 2s. And the terrible 2s are the time when the child is more excited about breaking the tower than by building it. And what that is showing us is that's showing the beginnings of the desire to have impact on the world. And we see that emotion. We see anger. at about the age of 3.5, the child begins to see that there is a difference between you and me, in the sense that there is a quality, there's a judgment that begins to kick in. There's a value of I am good, I am bad. And this is where the emotion of shame comes in. So these 4 primary emotions are what help me make sense, help me guide other people and encourage other people in their own self-reflective journey to inquire, well, what's really going on in me? Why am I feeling the emotions I feel? So from this, we then go into our needs. So I would like to ask you, let me just check my notes to make sure. So I'm going to ask you now to close your eyes or keep your eyes open. And I'm going to just say the following sentences. I'm going to ask you, how does it feel when I say this sentence? Or does it feel good? Or does it feel less good? Let yourself breathe and just take in these sentences, because indeed, these are part of the sentences that perpetuate human suffering and perpetuate conflict. So, the first sentence. I feel pleasure in my body and vitality in being alive. I feel secure and at ease. I feel connected and cared for. I feel seen, understood, and considered. I feel free to express and exert my will. I feel fairly treated. I can trust people. I feel valued and respected. I know who I am and what I am. I live by my values. When we feel, when we feel that these needs are met, we feel happy. That's a picture of my eldest son and my daughter-in-law and my grandson. So every time I look at that, I just filled with joy and happiness. But their happiness is their happiness. Why are they feeling their happiness? And that joy is because, I would argue, these needs are being met. And that's true, I believe, for all of us. Now, allow me now to help organize this a bit and show you how these are connected. So the survival need is about staying in life. And it consists of physical aliveness and safety. Physical aliveness being the spectrum. It's the hedonic value of from pleasure to pain. And we're living constantly and sensing constantly where are we on that spectrum, which is crucial for self-regulation when our emotions hijack us, which leads to violence. Love, the feeling of being cared for and cared about. This rhythmicity of being able to attune to each other, to sense each other, to feel with each other is central to the ability to feel loved. So if you want to feel loved and cared for, what I'm saying is it's too general to say, I want to be loved. But what does it look like? We go to our needs to answer those questions. How do I get the recognition? What does it mean to see me, to understand me? What does it mean to be included in your circle? And we can already imagine and see how that sequences to the dance, to moving together, to breathing together, to creating together, to expressing the emotion together, to have the tension of our emotions negotiated together. So, so that sense of being loved and cared for comes through these two other needs. Power. We need to put power on the table, but we need to understand what the underpinnings of power is about. Impact, that I have impact in my life, impact in creating safety and security for me and my children, that I have impact, that I can exert my will and even stand up for my values. So we need to mobilize and accept and drill into us the energy of anger to be in service of us. So it's the energies that we want to work with, that we understand so well in the dance. But for non-dancers, you know, this model evolved because I wanted to contribute to a peace process. And I felt helpless that everyone was cross. And I've been involved in track 2 negotiations, and people just crossed. And it's very frustrating. So I decided to take myself out of that scene and engage in a different context, but in the meantime, to try to develop a map to describe what's going on. So power in this picture talks about the fairness and the autonomy needs that satisfy power. And lastly, meaning. Man's search for meaning, woman's search for meaning is connected to our values, to feeling valued and respected, to knowing who I am and how I'm able to live by my values. Now, one of the interesting dynamics that happens is that these needs are in a system. So for example, people will kill for honor because their honor feels like life and death. Okay? People will kill for their identity because their identity feels like life or death. People will kill for unfairness because they don't feel fairly treated, even though maybe what they really want is recognition, to be seen. So these dynamics are part of what's so complex in this matrix of needs. What these two energies, which each of the hungers have, are needs that satisfy the individual and strengthen the individual in the tribe. These are social needs. So, so if we want to create agency, empower individuals, we want to look towards first physical aliveness, how to strengthen autonomy, because I don't need anybody to do that for me. I can do that for myself. I can get up in the morning if I'm feeling bad. Whatever I am, I can always access my physical aliveness and my autonomy need. And through that, I can work on my recognition and my esteem. Now, if I've been wounded, I will be more sensitive to being triggered around these. And that is particularly telling when we look at our tribal needs. Our tribal needs are connected to belonging, to safety, to identity, and to fairness, to creating very clear rules of the game are necessary in order to feel safe. Identity, to strengthen the movement, the languaging that we can put in the dance, in the various movement qualities, the gestures that have profound meaning and subtlety. That's all part of what's reinforcing community life and strengthening the tribe. Together, it increases survival. So, what happens? What makes us triggered? How do we know that our needs aren't being met? If these are not met, it triggers a defense response. And we know that the fight, flight, freeze, collapse response is part of what we see. You see it between Israeli soldiers and Palestinian soldiers or Palestinian people. You see it between a husband and a wife, between children, between communities, between the history of the world is a history of people suffering from triggered defense responses, from people not knowing how to negotiate these in a way that is with what Rosenberg understood is moving up to the higher sense of consciousness, which we can get to by being more deeply embodied. So what is at risk of being judged? So I'm going to ask everybody, people to put it, if they can, in their chat box. What is so dangerous about being judged? What is one of the basic motivators for what makes people triggered? So what's so dangerous about being judged? Maybe somebody wants to just add, what's so bad about being judged? What can happen if you're judged? Maybe somebody could read them to me because I don't have.
Rejection, feeling devalued, triggers, misunderstood, shame, takes me out of the moment. Being left behind by the tribe, triggers insecurities.
Feeling inferior.
Right, exactly. Exactly. So, yes, they'll think
Low
I'm not
self-esteem, loss of relationship.
Exactly. The fear of judgment is so profound, which is one reason why our inner judge, the judge that we've internalized, our inner critic, and the outside judge is so powerful, and it's very effective in keeping people in line. But it's devastating to the quality of life when it's not well managed. So if you judge me, I'm going to have all of my needs are put on at risk. They're put on the line. I won't be okay. I'll disappear. I'll feel tight and anxious. I won't be seen. I'll be misunderstood. They'll be excluded and rejected. I'm going to lose. They will force me to do something against my will. They will treat me unfairly and take advantage of me. They won't let me be. I'll be lost. These feelings all, from across the spectrum. Across the spectrum, people have these feelings and these perceptions, and these beliefs are what drive conflict. They perpetuate conflict. They perpetuate the perpetuators. The people who are wounded will continue wounding others because they themselves have these thoughts in their own minds, because our traumas are held in the body memory, both personal traumas, collective and transgenerational traumas. So what do we do with this heaviness? How do we make people safe? How do we create safety? And this is where I'm going to now stop the talking, because I know it's a lot of material that I've given you, and I hope I haven't completely, I can't see anybody's reaction, so I don't know how you're taking this in, but I've tried to be as streamlined because there's so much more in here that I'm not talking about. But suffice it to say that there is an incredible web that's going on within us and between us. And that one of our jobs as people who want to heal this planet in our relationships, and in our relationships with ourselves, with each other, and to our environment, is to be compassionate to what is it that may help people feel safe. So I'm only going to we're going to focus now on one of these, but just to tell you that, for example, active listening is what you learn I'm a mediator, and the first thing you learn as a mediator is active listening. How it's the primary reason why mediation works is because people want to be heard. So but there's a lot to say here, which I won't say. I'll just suffice it to segue now on this embodiment journey to one of these, and that is the need for physical aliveness and how we are able to resource ourselves within our bodies through breath and more, which is where I will now hand it over to Judy, who will do a very exciting presentation on myofascial work and on interoception. So, Judy, I will stop sharing my screen and I will let you share yours.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you. Let me just get hooked in here. Let me just do my technical setup. Okay. All right. So as Deborah has mentioned in the needs matrix that she's created out of this journey of trying to understand conflict for the goal of peace, she's taking us into quite a large perspective of human needs and human suffering. And she also gave us the pair of when do our needs get into conflict because of tribal issues, collective issues, and when do they get into conflict in more of our individual situations? And I'm going to speak a little bit more to the individual situation. Resource and breath, I want to start with that because the body, we see the body as a resource in our work. And I want to start with a very simple dictionary definition of what is a resource. It's something turned on for support or help. It's an available supply to be drawn on when needed. A resource is the ability to deal with a situation effectively. And in the root of the word, it means to rise again, or to surge, which are very embodied words to me. When we're working with this needs matrix that Deborah described, it is so emotional because we suddenly look at where do we have unmet needs, which can't help but take us into that psychological place of, whew, I remember when this need wasn't met. So it's very emotional. It triggers our unconscious wounds. And when these triggers are activated, as adults, we automatically have defense responses showing up in our thoughts, showing up in our emotions. And these are all held as memories in the body tissue. And it's at that level that I became very curious to look a little bit deeper into that. Movement becomes a resource, and all the dancers on this forum know this. We know how dance has made us come alive. For myself, I began dancing at the age of 18, seriously dancing, after my own father was murdered. And I was so devastated that it wasn't the therapy, and it certainly wasn't the antidepressants that took me up wanting to live. It was starting to dance. That experience made me come alive. So my curiosity wants to know, like, why is that? What about dance? What about movement made me come alive? So keep that in mind as we look a little more closely, at the science of it, at the body science of it. What we know now is that there's actually sensory receptors in the fascia tissue of our body. And this fascia tissue has receptors, sensory receptors, that literally tell us not only the sensation of what we're feeling, but the emotion of how we feel about that sensation. And that's called interoception, or the felt sense. And by literally moving the body and tuning in with the felt sense, we can build an integrative sense of the body systems, the emotions and the thoughts, all balancing into a dynamic whole. Many of you may know fascia, what fascia is, but just a quick review, or for those of you who don't know, even though there's 4 basic tissue types in the body, fascia being a unique tissue type, it's really a fluid fiber matrix that connects and wraps. It binds and holds everything together. It wraps around our muscles, connects ligaments to bone, wraps around nerves and blood vessels, and even encases our organs. So this very unique body tissue, and let me show you the graphic on the right. The bottom part is a schematic of a muscle, cross section. Muscle tissue is actually wrapped into bundles, and what wraps it together is the fascia. That deep, dense fascia holds muscle into bundle formations. On top of muscle, we have lighter or looser fascia that is the webbing you see there in the picture. And that's connecting up to the roof area, which is our skin. So literally, if you look at the image on the left, the fascia is all over our body. And when we move fascia, and fascia also moves us. Okay, I'm trying to advance this to the next slide. I don't seem to be able to do that. Let's see. Okay, try that. All right. So what is this felt sense? Okay, there's fascia and there are these receptors, but how does it work? 90% of our free nerve endings in the fascia send signals to our brain. That is the body-mind connection. And the brain, the insular area of the brain, then decodes these messages and it alerts us to any changes in our internal body state. So this interoception system affects so many aspects of us. It affects self-awareness. It affects emotional recognition, that we know how we feel, and the regulation of it. So when Deborah talked about conflict, and we talk about when we get triggered and activated, we literally can come to the fascia and these receptors in the awareness of, do I want to react at this moment to what I'm doing, or can I calm myself down and regulate? Interoception integrates with problem solving, perspective taking, social understanding, reading social cues, flexible thinking, and intuition. So embodied cognition, this idea of embodied leadership, is really fascia driven, because embodied cognition is looking at how posture and behavior, how the brain and the body are linked. And we can even simplistically think of the metaphors we use. I feel down, that immediately goes into a slump, because we have this connection of how we feel and how we think, and therefore how we behave. I'm going to give you a little bit, just a small introduction to this movement fascia work. And in it, as you do this practice for a period of time, the goal is really to develop somatic trust. It's not just to I'm going to stretch, I'm a little tight here. It's really to develop a much deeper principles that support somatic trust. So as we do the movement, the focus is really on this interoception, this felt awareness, the feeling awareness as we're moving. We also want to resource into what's pleasurable. We want to come into a state in our bodies that's positive. So although we might begin moving, go, oh, well, this doesn't feel good, back off from it. Come to a place where maybe you go this far in the movement, not this far in the movement, so that you're regulating in yourself what feels good. What feels good in my tissue, in my fascia, in my body. And as we build these connections through our fascia, we actually develop a much deeper sense of trust in ourselves, feeling safe, feeling that our body is at home, is our home, and that we're at home. And of course, greater resilience is a natural outcome of working with the fascia and working with movement and dancing. And that builds with conscious mindfulness, that really builds integration, and adaptation in ourselves. Taking these fascia principles, I've been deeply influenced by Kieran Gutner, who is a teacher of Sling's myofascial training, and also deeply influenced by Irmgard Bartinyev and the Laban work, which has taught me so much about connectivity. So I put together from those deep teachings something I'm doing now called Movement for Equanimity. That's what I'd like to share with you. It's a myofascial movement practice. Myofascial just means muscle and fascia. And it's done with a very specific intention and a very specific focus. And that focus begins with the felt sense. Can you feel not just the sensation of your movement, but the emotion of how you feel about that sensation? And of course, the root of equanimity is linked to feeling calm and also linked to that sense of breath. The meaning is breath. So any of you who have a breath practice, which could be yoga or other breath practices, know what I'm talking about in terms of the deep centering quality of breath and mindful movement. So let me exit from this for a moment and let's stand up. I really want to get us moving. I have to shift my camera. Let me do a little technical thing so you can see me. I have to bring it up higher. Okay.
Judy, stop sharing.
Oh, stop sharing. Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. Let me get my arrow back on this place. Hang on, I'm just trying to get my arrow where it needs to go to stop sharing. I'm a little bit of trouble technically here. Give me a moment. Here we go. All right. Okay. So moving the fascia, what is this thing? What I'm going to give you is so simple. It's so simple. So I want you to put your attention on what I'm guiding you to experience in the simplicity of the movement. Hopefully you can see. Can you see me, my feet and everything?
Yes.
All right. So we actually have 12 fascia lines in the body. Think of them as sheaths, long connecting energies. And I want to start by allowing you to key into just a few of them today, because I'm only going to do a short segment with you. So we have what's called the superficial back line, which actually begins at your eyebrow. So just let yourself tap lightly on the bone, the ridge there of the eyebrow. And this fascia connection goes over your skull, of course, connecting the head, goes all the way down your back muscles. You're going to feel to your sacrum and pelvis. It goes down past that. Stop for just a moment at your sit bones, which are the bones right under the flesh of the buttocks. And that's where your hamstrings attach. And trace down now all the way down the legs, down the calf, and go under the foot. Go under the foot. That is the superficial back line, that whole connection from the ridge over the head all the way down under the feet. That's your superficial back line. And that fascia supports our uprightness. The superficial front line, I'm going to have you start from the tops of the feet, right where the toes are. And I want you to brush up the leg all the way through the thigh. The first branch stops at your ASIS, right here at your pelvis, this pointed area. And then come to your pubic bone and trace all the way up through the center belly, chest. Come up to these lateral muscles on the neck a bit and trace all the way up to these bony areas, these occipital condyles here where the skull rests on the spine. That's your superficial front line. So the sheath, the connectivity of the fascial muscles are going all the way up. And what most of us learned very early in dance was the energy goes up the front and down the back. So as we're doing this first movement, I want you to think of and be aware of, tune into the balance between the front and the back line. Very subtle. We'll start by allowing your feet to just soften like butter melting in a pan. That your feet melt and ground to the earth. That begins our grounding because these fascias connect through the feet. So if you feel the difference, if you tighten your feet for a moment, if you grip the floor, if you do this, you're ungrounded. Breathe into the feet, let them be butter melting in a pan. Come into an ease with that. Because all the mindfulness we'll be doing, we're going to slow down just a little bit more. Now, we're going to begin with the arms coming up slowly. And I want you to notice what happens between the front and the back fascia lines as you do this simple arm movement slowly. And to coordinate the breath, I'm going to ask you to exhale as the arms come up. And inhale as the arms come down. Still allowing your feet to soften and spread on the floor. And we'll do that several times. So as the arms come up on the exhale, are you bowing forward? Are you losing the front fascia line? As you open the arms, can you allow the simultaneous streaming up in the front and streaming down in the back? Using just as much energy as you need to do it. With the stability happening through these front and back fascia lines. And add a little more challenge. This time, as you exhale and the arms come up, I want you to rise up on your toes. And then as you inhale, lower the heels slowly. Let's take that again. Exhaling as you rise up. And inhaling as you come down. Notice how you feel about those sensations. We'll take it once again. How do you feel? Now, if you're very skilled as a dancer, you may be bored. Like, why am I doing this? This is so easy. If you're not so skilled, you may be worried, am I going to fall over? Am I going to lose my balance? So just notice the emotions you're feeling as we do this one more time. The sensation creates what emotion? Of course, for me, I'm teaching, so I definitely don't want to fall over and look bad. And come down with the arms coming down. Tune in to the front and back fascia lines for a moment as you breathe and just notice your sensation. And now we'll take a very simple roll down. Just nod the chin. And just roll down part way. As you are expanding the superficial back line. And just pause as you're rolled halfway down. Just pause. Breathing and allowing the whole back and the ribs to fan open. And notice, does that breath and energy travel down into the arms? Can you allow that to cascade out? Keep rolling down and bend the knees slightly till you can touch the inside of the foot. And I want you to tap the inside, just rub the inside of the foot. And as you roll up, you're going to trace along the inside of the leg, coming into the adductors. And as you roll up, I want you to just pause at the hip joints, keen into the pelvic floor. This now moves us into a third fascia stream, which is the deep front line. So that connects all the way from the interior of the foot, the adductors, and into the pelvic floor, between your pubic bone and your coccyx, and between the greater trochanters on either side, you have a sling of pelvic floor support. And it's that core fascia that sequences all the way up. And just take a soft swallow. And we're going to roll down again. And when we come up, I'm going to ask you to engage that pelvic floor a little bit more consciously. So we're gently rolling down, expanding, feeling the support up the front. So we have the front supporting us as we roll down. Come to your lowest point, take a breath. And as you roll up, begin this movement right in the pelvic floor. The pelvis begins the roll up. Connect to your feet, into the pelvic floor. Rolling up, letting your head be the last thing to come up. Take an easy swallow. And one more time. Rolling down, let the head nod. Again, we're moving slowly. How do you feel about these sensations? How do you feel in this roll down? Come to the lowest point. Take a pause. You can always bend your knees. And as you roll back up, begin right in the pelvic floor. As you roll up, deep inside in the fascia line, so you come all the way to upright. And exhale once again, let your arms come up. Equalize the front and back fascia lines and open the arms to the side. And just stay here for a moment. We're going to open now the lateral lines, which run, of course, from the sides of the body, and just take a lateral movement here and begin a little elastic pulse, because there are 12 fascia qualities, and as we train those qualities, we come into different aspects of how we can use the awareness we discover in the fascia. So if you have no elasticity, you're certainly going to be more rigid. So allow this elasticity, and now come up, and we'll take that once again. Reaching over, and this time bring the bottom arm up, now requiring you to add a different fascia quality of a little more tensile strength. And just hold that for a moment as you breathe. How do you feel about this feeling? Having the strength to really open and yet be steady. Lower the arm. And this time, just allow this arm to descend and wait until you feel a little pull in the fascia that brings you up. Let that tissue plump up and relax for a moment. And again, let the arms come up. Notice how you feel over the feet, because this work is really about developing the felt sense. Are you over both your feet? How is your breath? Does one side feel different than the other, since we've only really moved the lateral side on one side? And now we'll take it the other way. Leaning in, opening the lateral fascia lines and playing with the elastic quality. For some of you, this may be more playful. For some of you, might feel like, oh, I don't know, maybe I'm going to go too far. So again, just notice how you feel. You can engage the elasticity. Bring it up. Register the sensation. And we'll go again as the arm comes up. As we go into the lateral, we'll now add the tensile strength, a different fascia quality. What does that build for us? What is having the ability to hold steady, to have the strength to be there? What does that give us? Are you breathing, or does your breath stop? So breathing into that tensile strength. And again, let the arm come down first until you feel a pull in the tissue to bring you upright. Exhale, let the arms come up onto the toes. This time bend the knees. Roll the heels down and straighten the legs. Roll up to one of your toes. You're now just beginning to bring one foot off the floor. And we'll shift into this tensile strength on one side as we just slowly lift and lower the leg. How do you feel with this balance? How do you feel with this challenge? Again, for some of you who are skilled dancers, this will be very easy. But notice as you slow down to attend to how you feel as you're moving, requiring this lateral stability. And then let the leg just come out and come back down. Just stand and be with yourself and notice. Am I grounded? Am I breathing? Is one side more open? Do I have more spaciousness? Exhale again and rise up. Allow the knees to bend, adding a little bit of more challenge. Roll the heels down. Again, the back and front superficial line are supporting you as we now shift. Roll into the other toe. And just beginning to slowly lift and lower the leg. When I have to balance, it can feel great to have the ability to do this. That's partly what tensile strength gives us, is a sense of fortitude. If I'm nervous, if I feel I can't do it, what is that feeling? Is there judgment about ourselves? So lifting and lowering, hold the balance, just breathe into it. Key into your felt sense. How do I feel as I'm doing this? And let the leg extend and lower down. Arms slowly coming down. And notice, how do you feel in your body? Do you feel balanced? One more roll down, just nod the chin. Remember, you're lifting up the front. There's no collapse as the back lengthens. You roll down to a point that's comfortable for you. Breathing into the tissue. When you get to the lowest point, pause. And when you're ready, start with the pelvis and the pelvic floor to bring you up gradually. Balancing the front and back fascia lines. Continuing to breathe and feel that integration of front to back until you're finally all the way up. And take another soft swallow. Come back into the awareness of your feet. Are they still melted butter on the floor? So slowing down in the movement lets us start to cultivate that interoception. So that movement is not merely imitated. You're not just copying me. You're doing what feels good to you at a rhythm that feels good to you. You're keying into how sensation and emotion are informing you. But you're also simultaneously developing a certain capability to have balance and strength and elasticity and resilience through the movements themselves. So come back to sitting down. Let me just share a little bit with you, a little bit more in application. Let me move my camera a little bit lower. So what we're finding is that we each have different tissue types. Really, very generally, we have the Viking tissue type, which is a little bit more what I am, which has great ability in defense response to bind and to armor. So when Deborah went over fight, flight, freeze, collapse, I fight. I can do the others as well, but I have that in my tissue and it goes right into my upper back. And I can armor, and I can defend, and I can keep myself upright. And you know where I go? I go to righteousness. Not very helpful in a conflict. Not very helpful in conversation. So when I'm doing the fascia work, I work quite a lot on gaining more elasticity and plasticity to open up those areas as I'm moving slowly that will allow me to enter into a conversation that is nonviolent, that I can address my needs or the other person's needs from a much more receptive place. Otherwise, my tissue has me like this, right? Been trained as a dancer, know how to do that. That's not the point in our work. The point is to have the versatility. And I want to be able to stand firm, but I don't want to stand and block out. The other tissue type is the temple dancer. A lot of dancers who are naturally flexible have this body type, the yielding, the flexible. But the temple dancer often doesn't have enough resilience to set boundaries. Doesn't have enough tensile strength, perhaps, to warrant off when needed to say no, you say no and you set those boundaries. That the tissue itself also lends itself a little bit more to disassociation, to just leaving your body. I don't know, I can do all these things. What did you feel? I don't know, I just did all these things. I can move, I can do all this stuff. I don't really know how I feel about it, but it's very expressive and it feels great. But we're keen into sensation and feeling together. We want to know both those things, and we want to really come into an understanding of how our tissue is patterned in defense and how to open the repertoire through this fascia movement to have a greater range, to engage in our needs and our unmet needs, and be a more resilient and adaptable human being. So again, I know this is a very short, tiny bit of movement and a tiny bit of explanation. Let me now come back to our final. Deborah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Deborah, if there's anything you wanted to say.
No, there's way too much to say, and there's the applications of the movement. There were many ways, many metaphors to the movement supporting leadership and personal leadership. And I don't know the fascia work well enough. I just remember, I want you to talk about that too. But maybe there'll be more coming out in the question, the Q&A. We want to leave it all. How much time do we have, Shauna, for Q&A?
Yeah, we're right towards the end. So I think we should probably move to Q&A and hopefully meet you again in another way. This has been incredible. I also want to go much deeper, but I know that there are several audience members responding. I want to see if Nadra and Annie have been following any questions in the chat or have come up with any questions themselves. And I just want to thank you both for this incredible depth of your work. And it's extremely meaningful and helpful, empowering and strengthening. So we need this type of wisdom in the world more every day. So thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want to start, Nadra, or?
Well, I actually am curious how the two of you began working together. I know that that might not be the exact pinpoint of what you've been talking about, but I like to understand how people connect and develop work, and especially because you are sort of coming from different areas of how to deal with the body, but yet I like the flow of how your work intersected. So what brought you together, if you don't mind sharing that with us?
Friendship. We went to grad school together at UCLA in the dance department. Judy was I was in ethnology and Judy was in education. Right, Judy, you were in education, right? You can see she's a great teacher. So, so yeah, she taught like 30 years at UCLA. So that's how we connected. And it was through, yeah, we began our first embodied leadership experiment in Germany a number of years ago. And we've been experimenting with what it looks like and how I knew that there was an embodied piece missing. And then there are other wonderful people who practice embodied leadership, Wendy Palmer, and there are other wonderful people, but our particular approach is us. And it's from my background in also the biological sciences, dance, and anthropology, and Judy in education kinesiology. Judy, do you want to say anything else? I don't want to.
Well, I would say that, you know, we're both Laban movement analysts, and in the Laban system, there's great philosophy and thinking around what's the meaning of movement. And so, of course, Laban was a, you know, mid-20th century huge choreographer and dancer, mostly in Europe and Germany. But this whole curiosity of us being whole human beings. And so how does the dance, the integration of dance translate? And Deborah and I, when we formed, creating a course called Embodied Leadership in 2012, it was investigating those, like, what are the elements that make us embody? What are the things that dance and qualities of movement and expression and rhythm, what has it given us as human beings? How do we translate that? And so most recently we've come together in this exploration of how to translate that, not to this audience that's so sophisticated, but to the layperson. Like, where's this like smallest common denominator? And then of course, Deborah's evolution with her work has gone into the Heifetz needs matrix, which has been so powerful to my own life, that the sharing you might be asking about is, I'm really using Deborah's work to help undo my traumas, to help me undo where do I get clogged up with my partner, Peter, and how can I come into not an angry place, but how can I come into a compassionate place, and how do I understand it? And that's sort of the go back and forth is that very deep personal journey of transformation as well, that we share in our friendship.
I love how your friendship speaks to peace building and alliances and how we can grow as humans together. And I wanted to relate that back to what Deborah also said in her presentation about how the history of the world is a history of people struggling with defense responses. And I just think that's very powerful for all of us to reflect on, as everything that you've shared. Annie, were you able to see questions that came through? I know that there were many, but were there any that you pulled out? You may be muted, I'm not sure. Oh, no, you're good. Yeah.
So the first question is, how do you bring in this movement work in negotiations, for peace negotiations?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think, Judy, the matrix comes in, and then you can do certain practices, like you could possibly constellate the matrix on the ground and have people standing and feeling. So you would more lead them to embodied experiences. Wouldn't call it dance. So depending upon, I mean, I make a living in the business community, as you know, Shana. So I'm working with people who are not dancers, but that's the challenge. I mean, I wanted to work with people who were in the military, so people who were designing policy, so that they can see that underlying there's a way to have a conversation that gets to the deeper, thicker meaning behind the conflicts, and a way to see how do you create safe spaces by understanding the commonality of our hungers and our needs, the vast variation of our satisfiers. That's all historically specific, culture specific, gender specific. I mean, it is totally variable. But the fact that we can sort of anchor ourselves on a common language, on a common striving to name the values, that's sort of the inroads. And from there, hopefully, to get people to feel. I mean, now that it's so commonplace for people to meditate, that's the invitation to take the deep meditative practice of dropping in, sensing the felt sense, and then taking that into as much movement as we can. So in the negotiating room, it would take a whole different type of practices, but in principle, the same. Getting embodiment in there somehow.
And I would say it's imperative to get people moving. It can't just be an idea. It can't be complex dance movement, but it can be the development of that interioception through breath, through smaller movements. And we both really believe that it's something that has to be practiced. It's not just a one-time thing. It's not an idea, it's really a practice. And the more embodied we become, the potential we gain much more empathy, right? If we have greater interioception, we feel with others. And then of course, we become more integrative. So the fragmentation, I mean, I'm an American, the fragmentation in America, the rigidity of thinking, it's not separate from the body. It isn't. So bringing that awareness in can shift. There's an embodied cognition that absolutely can be transformational as people practice the movement. And we have to be bold and bring the movement in. It can't just be talking around the table.
Speaking to that, Judy, the way that you shared movement was so skillful and helped us to all practice, as well as spoke to the different experiences people might be having. The movement was relatively simple, like as Deborah is saying, it's not full-on dancing, dance movement, but it is, you did speak to, perhaps somebody feels off balance, or perhaps somebody else feels that they are, this is too easy, so that was a really wonderful teaching as well. And I think I completely agree with you that that movement, for example, is something that people could practice and then even become better at facilitating, peace discussions, or any of the various applications that people may feel in education or whatever your field is.
And I think,
unfortunately, go ahead.
I was going to say, again, I'm speaking as such a young Western American. I mean, if you go back to the deep roots of yoga, they were doing that. When you look at America yoga, and let's go in and let's sweat, did my workout, there's no felt sense developed. I'm not saying every yoga is like that. I'm saying it's what you bring to it. All of you as dancers know the the quality of how you're trained has everything to do with the integration that's developed. So are you trained to feel or not feel? Are you invited to be your full humanity in the dance? Are you invited to really tune in so there's an inner life from the yoga practice, not just, I've developed my muscles from yoga, I sweated a lot today. So this whole mind-body continuum is so critical. That's all.
I would add to that, that it's important to tolerate discomfort and to name it and to work on it, because it's uncomfortable to go to the difficult places that have to be unraveled. So part of what happens, what the reason, the sort of the interlacing of the matrix with the movement work is also to help people. For example, I have a client who is unable to stand up for her values because she has an oversensitivity around feeling safe. But yet she's not protecting her own children. So the more that you can bring her into naming what she's capable of doing, but she's not aware that she's capable of, because of these other voices, these other beliefs that are kicking in. So the matrix and the movement work sort of interweaves to help people locate themselves, to find their sensitivities, to create tolerance, to hold the discomfort, which we need to hold in order to move through conflict, and to transform it into greater intimacy, greater compassion, and greater critical thinking, and ultimately creativity and curiosity. It has to open up. We can't do that unless our nervous system is calmed down sufficiently so that we can sense the pain, but not get hijacked by it. Sense the emotion, but not get hijacked by it. Because once we're hijacked, there's no more creativity, there's no more critical thinking, and there's no more problem solving. So that
and we're going to be going into a 4-day Zoom course on this at the end of April. So if anyone's interested, maybe you can just share our
we'll
email.
be able to, we'll be able to direct people from a website that I'm going to be sharing right after this. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to bring this to a close, this portion, but I wanted to thank you for going to such depth with this, what I think of as the wisdom that women inherently carry, and I think that Deborah alluded to when she discussed in her presentation about in the peace negotiations, how she was seeing how the men were responding very differently than her to the way that they think, or the way that they were thinking. And I am just going to carry each session through the rest of my day, and we'll find ways to connect everybody. I will share, as I said, a couple of websites that you can follow in order to follow up with any of these things, such as the course that you're mentioning or anything like that. Also, after this, there will be, first I'm gonna have Revaji speak a little bit, but also we have a couple of musics to close out the session, but we'll be ending the communication part after this. So Reva, would you like me to share the screen
No.
or just first you speak? Okay.
I can. I just first of all wanted to say thank you so much to every one of you, excuse me, who participated today. It has been absolutely stunning from beginning to end. We needed 5 days to really honor what all of you have brought to us. In that spirit, I just wanted to say this has been the 6th webinar in our series, Educating for Justice Through Peace. And as we move forward, what we're going to be doing is deepening some of the conversations that we've started over the last year or so, and coming forward in April. We don't have a specific date for it yet, but we will put updates on our website, iginpcanada.org. We're going to be looking at the question of educating for peace in wartime. And we're specifically going to focus on Armenia and the Caucasus region. And it will be part of a larger series of webinars and communications that we're doing in partnership with the Jai Jagat movement. Jai Jagat is an international peace movement, for those of you who may not know. And I encourage you to please look up jaijagat.org and learn more about it. And the final thing I want to say is thank you so much to Shauna for all of the amazing work she put into organizing today. And I'm going to turn it back over to Shauna now. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you too. And thank you to all of the people who are working behind the scenes. I can't name you all right now, but thank you all. I'm going to just share this website, which Reva just mentioned. And so you can take a look at this. And then we will close out the session, as I said, with some music. And this music that is by Angel Luis Figueroa, who has done a magical job of, because he can't meet with other musicians during the pandemic, he has a video of himself harmonizing and playing different instruments. So he is a very accomplished and wonderful musician. And I'll just leave you to quickly read his bio before John Majay shares the 2 final videos that will close out the session. And I also wanted to thank each of the presenters from the bottom of my heart. I look forward to having further conversations. Thank you. And thank you everyone for attending. And I pass it to John Majay to share the video. I think he's there. We can always give him a call.
I'll just check with him.
Thank you, Ria. It's sometimes these things on Zoom happen at the wrong moment when your dog's waking up or your various things are happening. Anyways, I shall leave this day very fulfilled. And thank you so much to wherever you are in the world, whether you're sleeping or awake for the next 8 hours. I know that John Majay was in a zone that could be difficult for him to play the music. Is that, no, here it goes. Great.
Yeah, Maya.
心比较用老多。